In our next vignette, we're going to be visiting the same board, only this time it'll be an executive session. NRS 116 clearly spells out the topics that may be discussed during an executive session and the do's and don'ts for the board members. Once again, please use your pen and pencil to make notations of the violations that you feel you've observed. And now, our executive session.
Hey, I thought I was supposed to get my questions answered from the meeting.
Hey, what are you doing here? This is an executive session. You're not allowed to be here at all. You have to leave right now.
Are you kidding me? This is ridiculous.
We have a short meeting today. We're going to discuss some problems in our community. I'm just thankful we don't have her to disturb our meetings today.
So am I.
Me too.
I need to talk about my neighbor. He really pissed me off. I told him specifically that he could not put up a flagpole in his front yard. And I want the board to send him a letter now demanding him to remove it.
I thought that a homeowner would have to put in an ARC request to the committee to put up a flagpole.
The ARC can make recommendations, but only the board can make decisions.
Well, I think we need to support Jane. If this is an issue, my husband dealt with her neighbor when he was on the board.
Excuse me, as a former veteran, I believe that it's everybody's God-given right to fly the flag, especially if it's going to piss Jane off.
Okay, Jane, if you write the letter, I will sign it.
Please keep in mind, too, that I did warn him in the first place.
Well, the next item is to change our landscape vendor by awarding the contract to the No Weeds Company.
Whose brother-in-law is this?
Well, the current proposal is much cheaper than the contract that we have currently, and he does work for some of us.
Oh yeah, I know about that. My neighbor uses him, but he complains that he doesn't always show up when he's scheduled to do the work.
You know what, though? We save $5,000 a year, so I move that we accept his contract.
Second.
Excuse me, I have a question. I'd like to know why our maintenance guy's truck is parked in front of your house at the same time, on the same day, every week. Why?
I have a heart condition, and he helped me with some simple chores around my house and yard. Anyway, he's salaried and he has no fixed hours.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about something new. I hear my neighbors constantly talking about Jim Jones down the street. They say he hasn't paid his assessments in 6 months.
Well, as a board member, it's your responsibility to contact him. If you're unable to do that, I'm speaking.
Hello? What? Okay, look, we're in executive session, We're talking about violations. Hey,
You need to hang up.
I'll tell you all about them when I get home, okay?
Really?
Bye.
Isn't this supposed to be not talked about outside of this boardroom?
We're elected officials of the community. So confidentiality doesn't apply to us, and no one should get away with paying their assessments.
I have another issue. The greeter at the front desk was rude to me when I asked her to clean up the cup of coffee that I accidentally spilled. I think she should be docked 1 hour's pay for being insubordinate.
You really think cleaning up the floor is in her job description, do you now?
That's really a stretch when you just said you spilled the coffee. Why don't you clean it up?
Cleaning should be in her job description. If she's uppity about it, we can teach her a lesson by deducting it from her pay.
All right, well, I'll just tell the community manager to warn her about this, and then in the future, we'll deduct pay if she's disrespectful to any board members. And any other business?
I do have a question. When are we going to go out for bids on contracts?
The law states that we are required to get 3 bids on very large projects, and only when we don't already know the vendor.
But it's easy to award a contract to a vendor that we already know.
And it's also easy to award a contract when we know we're saving the homeowners money.
For sure.
And it's easy to award a contract when he's your relative.
I'm sorry I ask.
Really? I thought you were naive, but you're pretty damn stupid.
Well, you bag of bones, you're dead and you don't even know it. You don't even know that. That's all there is to it. I don't care.
This is ridiculous.
Could you take notes fast enough? Now let's go to our decal panel for their discussion of the violations they committed.
One of the things we saw in this vignette in the executive session was one of our homeowners, our board members, getting on the phone talking about something to do at the grocery store with his wife, and he's going to go home and talk to her about whoever was in violation.
I did that.
That's strictly confidential. That never leaves the boardroom. It just really doesn't. It was very funny, and it probably has happened, but it should never happen.
Pillow talk's not allowed?
No pillow talk. You can't tell your wife, your husband, your mother, your brother, your sister. That stays in the boardroom. Strictly confidential. And you also have to understand the need for making decisions and when to make decisions and when they should be public decisions or confidential decisions. If you're discussing a homeowner, their fines, their assessments, that's in the executive session. Like I said, that's confidential. That stays there. It doesn't go out of that room. If it's talking about awarding a contract, you don't do that in executive session, as we talked about before. You do it in the general session. You're free, you're open. Transparency is the best thing. It's your best friend. You'll never get in trouble. Like Chuck said earlier, try and get 3 bids if you can, but you have to do your best, and those would be read aloud in the regular meeting. But executive meetings are different. They really are. And if it's a legal issue and you're talking with your attorney, that could be an executive session. But there are very few things other than people's confidentiality and fines and things like that. Most things are discussed in the regular session.
You know, interestingly enough, there was if you remember back, the president had someone coming and working, a maintenance person, was working for him, doing personal work. And he went, well, he's salaried, so it doesn't really matter. Well, there is a huge conflict of interest thing going on there, because you actually, even though you're not paying the man, the HOA is paying the man.
And he's working for you.
And he's working for you. So you have free labor. If that isn't a conflict of interest, you know, so you have to avoid that type of a situation. You never want anyone to even think there's a conflict of interest. The situation just does not lend itself. It would be like you as the president, for instance, voting on an item when you had your own relative involved. You know, you should recuse yourself and not do it. So there's a conflict there. It's a very, very big thing. You never use an employee of the association to do your own personal tasks. You just don't do that, because
Even
that's
if
a
you do
conflict.
it 100% properly.
That's correct. You just step back from that, because
It
if
doesn't pass the smell test.
that's right. If it appears it's a conflict, probably is. Okay. Looking at the bid process just a little bit, you know, our laws changed recently. So now, if you go out for bid, and if you do, then you get 3 bids. And I remember the president saying, for large projects. Well, that's not the determining factor anymore. Depends on the size of your HOA.
This is governed by law, right?
It is. It's governed by law, because if your community is, I think the threshold is 1,000 units, I remember, so they cut it off. If you're less than 1,000 units and you go out for bid, then any bid that is more than 3% of your budget, that's a requirement for bids. If you're in a larger association where there's like over 1,000 units, well, then it's 1% of your budget. And the other interesting thing, I mean, bids for work of any kind, maintenance work, common area work, any kind of repair work, that's always been included. Now, professional services are also included, lawyer, accountant, for that nature. So it's a little tougher. You've got to be really, really careful now when you go out for the bid process. And Donna's right. You never do a bid process in executive session. You want it open, transparent, and that wouldn't happen.
You don't have to, if it says you should get a bid if it's over 3%, there's nothing wrong with saying, you know, it's only 2%, but we think we should get bids anyway.
Oh, yes. You can always do that. You can always do it. I thought it was interesting that when the bid was just a second, there was never a vote, even in the executive session, which was wrong. I mean, you think about that. You would never do that, you know. So, fraudulent thing. But that's an interesting situation. Never let yourself ever get in that.
And I tell you what, something else that's really important. Let the manager manage. You're not the manager. rely on your manager, rely on his or her expertise. If you rely on your experts, you will never get in trouble.
Yeah, that's true.
You already touched on it, Donna, but let me just cover the 4 things, the only 4 things you can do in executive session. There are only 4. If it's anything else, you can't do it in executive session. And I think a lot of board members get confused on that. First one is consult with an attorney regarding a proposed or pending litigation. So you can't discuss the attorney's contract, your contract with the attorney in executive session, but you can discuss other contracts, other matters, like your lawsuit with one of your homeowners or something like that. You can discuss that in executive session, and you should, to protect your attorney-client privilege. If you're discussing the character, conduct, or competence of your manager, should be done in executive session and treated as a confidential matter. Discussing violations of the governing documents. If homeowners are not following the rules and they're in violation, maybe there's a hearing. This is confidential in nature, should be done in executive session.
Shouldn't do it
Unless
on the phone.
homeowner requests.
Shouldn't do it on the phone,
do it on
right?
the phone, right.
That's right.
Unless the homeowner wants it to be done in open session. And there are cases where the homeowner will request to have their hearing done in open session because they feel like that would be beneficial to them. They're certainly allowed to do that. And the 4th one, which is less common, is the failure to comply with construction schedule. So you've got a home being built in your community or a home refurbishing or an expansion, and it's supposed to be done in 6 months and now it's gone past. You can discuss that in executive session because, again, it is confidential to that homeowner. Those are the only things you can discuss in executive session. No bids, none of those kind of things can be done in executive session that you saw being done in executive session pretty much. So the next question is, what defines the limits of the board member's authority? A lot of just things were done in the meeting where they didn't really have the authority to do those things. But what are those things? They're generally defined either by law, which of course takes precedence over everything, but generally they are what's in the CC&Rs or your governing documents in general. If you're unsure that you have the authority to do something, never do it until you've spoken with the proper professional, which might be your CPA, it might be your attorney, but whoever the proper professional is, spend the money, find out, get an opinion from them. If something goes wrong, you're not on the hook. We had in this meeting board members approving landscape contracts in executive session.
I know.
As you mentioned,
Yes.
He can't do that. There were no bids anyway, and it was never voted on. So the whole thing was a complete mess. The board had no right to do that.
Actually, it was illegal to even do it, period.
Exactly.
It was not a legal award of a contract.
The other thing that I noticed was that board members should never confront a resident directly regarding violations or delinquencies. That's something that's handled through the standard, whatever your standard compliance procedure is, which you should have a written policy on, probably governed partially by your CC&Rs and partially by the law. But if you don't have a written policy on how you handle violations, you better get one, because if you have somebody walking around saying, well, I'll go out and threaten him for you, you're violating the law. So it's very important that you do those things through the normal compliance procedure, which is often your community manager or a community management company. As you said, board members are never free of confidential limits. You are bound by confidential limits. Homeowners aren't, but you are.
It's an item that you could actually, your directors and officers insurance would never cover you when you do something illegal like that.
Right.
Unlawful. People don't realize
Which
that.
means you're not insured.
You could be absolutely sued, a lawsuit.
And not just you, but
Oh, yeah.
your spouse.
That's right.
You both could be on the hook.
So if a husband talks to his wife about the violation,
Correct.
and she talks to neighbors, you both get sued.
That's right.
And again, insurance will likely, possibly not cover you.
That's
I
right.
would say. Personal prejudices. There were some personal prejudice in this meeting, which is basically biased treatment. You're treating somebody differently than you would treat someone else. Retaliation, harassment, abuse, those kinds of things. we had a treasurer targeting the neighbor about his flagpole. She may have been right about the flagpole. I don't know. It's unclear what the facts are, but you don't do that. You go through the normal compliance process. The VP was upset about the greeter not cleaning up the coffee. Well, that was kind of a weird situation, but the president decides on his own, after the whole discussion occurs, that he's just going to have the manager threaten the greeter with a pay deduction if it happens again. Again, I don't even know if that's legal. There's an employment law involved as well. So just bad behavior. One last thing on that is the president should not have used the landscape vendor and then voted on for the association to hire him.
Yep.
As you pointed
Right.
out, it is a conflict of interest. It's an ethical violation. So I have a couple questions for each of you that
Okay.
after going through this with you and Chuck, the first one is, what do you think about the board's decision to approve the new landscaper in general? I mean, that whole process.
Well, that was such a fiasco. It was pretty obvious that the three board members, that being the president, the treasurer, and the vice president, had a meeting on their own with the other two absent, which was illegal. They decided they were going to use this new landscaper because they could save money. They said, I don't know what the amount was, I don't remember. But the idea was, instead of doing it in open session, opening a bid, they decided they're going to do it in an executive session. Now, you didn't know about it. I didn't know about it, being the new guy on the board at all. And we were summarily just dismissed
It appeared
because
as
of
though
that.
we didn't want you to know about it.
That was true. So, which you talk about opening yourself up for a big problem there. Besides, obviously, there was some personal prejudice going on. They liked the landscaper. He did work for other neighbors around there. He already knew the community, which is okay, but the bid process wasn't there. So it was a complete travesty of anything that went on, any board procedure, and the law and the state would have a ball with that, I'll guarantee you.
There are some HOAs, quite a few of them, that actually prohibit vendors from doing work for any of their residents.
We actually, this is funny, our landscape vendor does not allow any of his people to work in our community for any of the private citizens that own. So, that's a good policy.
I think it's a great policy.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on the decision to send a letter disallowing the flagpole?
Well, first of all, I can tell you in my community, we have a flag policy. We follow the U.S. recommendations on how to fly the flag. And I think it's a really bad idea. My own personal opinion, if someone wants to fly a flag on Veterans Day, Memorial Day, or just do it properly.
Or year-round?
Or year-round. We fly our flag and we're proud of our flag. What comes into question is if they start wanting to fly other type of flags, and then you would have to figure out what you want to do with that.
So you need a policy on that?
You'd need a policy. But as far as the American flag goes, as long as you follow the federal guidelines, I think you're fine.
The bid discussion, Chuck, that was...
That was interesting,
They
right?
didn't really discuss it except to say you didn't need to worry about it.
Well, there wasn't a bid discussion. And near as we could tell, there was one bid. They didn't open it. They didn't discuss any of the terms. They just said they were going to award the bid to Mr. Fix-It, if I remember
Right.
exactly. The law requires you got to read that in open session. You have to do that. And I know that maybe that runs a little bit long in a meeting, but that's the transparency part that you need to get to every time, because then you as a board are doing your duties. That's what we call that. I think you refer to it as a business judgment rule, where you act everything with the best knowledge you have. Well, this obviously didn't occur that way. They had one bid, we think. We don't know where it came from. And the other interesting thing was, it was the brother-in-law of the
Right.
president. And then he voted on it, of all things. He can't do that.
What should he have done?
He should have recused himself, period. Just stayed out of it.
Abstain.
That's right. And make that disclosure.
Disclose it
That's
and
right.
abstain.
What didn't happen. So that's how not to award a bid. Don't do it.
There was a whole lot here, what we
was
shouldn't
right.
do, right?
That was so flagrant.
Donna, the greeter situation was another weird situation, I think.
I think it was a very weird situation.
Badly handled and
Very badly
questionable.
handled, and it could have been handled so much better. Personally, if I saw coffee spilled somewhere, I probably would have cleaned it up myself. I wouldn't have wanted to deduct money from the receptionist to do that. I think that's ridiculous. But this is a board, obviously, that had some real problems, and they had no clue as to what they really need to do and how to do it. They need training.
It just seemed like there was a case where common sense went right out
Right
the
out the
window.
window.
You know, they felt entitled, even though there was no reason to do that.
No.
You're right. Good point.
All right, anything else?
No, I don't think
That's
so.
good.
All right, I hope that we covered the material pretty well there. There's obviously a whole lot of stuff to talk about, and probably we didn't hit all the points, but the key ones, hopefully we did.
Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this and learned. Now, if you'd like to learn more, perhaps you can use one of our other video presentations, or take a CAI class, or even perhaps become a decal member. If you wish to do that, please contact CAI at info@cai-nevada.org. Thank you for watching this presentation.